Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, distinguished guests, and above all, distinguished speaker for tonight, dear Djamila Ribeiro, welcome to this third Berlin Southern Theory lecture. Welcome to all of you, wherever you are and wherever you join us from. By coincidence, we have snow, our first day of snow here today in Berlin. And not by coincidence, this is yet again another online event. We cannot help this, unfortunately, but we hope to be able to offer you 1.5 hours of exciting intellectual stimulation and discussion, to which we invite you to participate. So let me say a few words. The founding text for this thematic lecture series states the following. The annual Berlin Southern Theory lecture, Foregrounds, Southern Theory and Epistemology, it honors diverse starting points and relations from, with, and for forms of theorizing, whose trajectories often depart from dominant Euro-American traditions. Thereby, this lecture series redresses lingering postcolonial asymmetries and aims to decenter and diversify theoretical debates in the social sciences and the humanities. This Berlin Southern Theory lecture is organized by the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology of the Freie Universität Berlin and the Leibniz-Zentrum Moderner Orient, ZMO, in collaboration with the Forschungscampus Dahlem at the Ethnologisches Museum. Now, over the course of the last year, we here in Berlin have been pursuing related projects, concerns, and discussions as university teachers and researchers, and in collaboration and in dialogue with colleagues in Africa, South and Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. In this way, and by means of hosting this lecture every year, which is delivered by a selected important thinker from the so-called Global South, we hope to contribute critically and constructively to the process of overcoming the dominance of Eurocentrism. The goal is to open up and enrich the perspective on conceptual reservoirs and theoretical approaches and pathways towards a fundamental reorientation. As the title of our first speaker, Felwine Sarr, said, to work towards a rewriting of the humanities from here. Now with that, let me turn to saying my thanks, namely for institutional support from the Berlin Center for Global Engagement within the Berlin University Alliance, then to colleagues and committee members from the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology and ZMO, namely Sandra Corkins, Hans-Jörg Dilger, Kristina Mashimi, Sonja Hegazi, Abdelai Senaye, and Lena Herzog, and also to Alexis von Posa for the Forschungscampus Dahlem. They all contributed to making today's event happen. Also, thanks to the members of the Berlin-based Colibri Collective on Conceptual Collaboration and the working group Thinkers and Theorizing from the South for regular meetings and discussions among the lines of these interests. Finally, thanks to our international colleagues who have been participating regularly in these online discussions over the last year, whether based in Delhi, Cape Town, Nairobi, Beirut, or elsewhere. And here I shall be mentioning one name in particular, namely last year's speaker, Pratama Banerjee from Delhi. Her lecture from last year has now just been published as a first in our online publication series connected to this lecture, which we aim to build and continue. And you can find a link to this in our chat here. But now let me hand over to my colleague Kristina Mashimi for a fuller introduction of tonight's speaker. Following then the lecture, afterwards Kristina will introduce our discussant and also moderate the Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Kai, and also very warm welcome from my side here from snowy Berlin. It's now my very big pleasure and also a big honor, and I'm really excited to introduce Djamila Ribeiro to you tonight or today. Djamila Ribeiro is a feminist. She is a public intellectual, a writer, a philosopher. She is also a social justice activist and one of the most influential voices in the Afro-Brazilian women's rights movement. She graduated in political philosophy from the Federal University of Sao Paulo, and she's currently a visiting professor at the Department of Journalism and at Pontifical Catholic University of Sao Paulo, as well as a fellow at the Johannes Gutenberg University in Mainz. In her published books, O que é o lugar de fala, Que tem medo do feminismo negro, and Pequeno Manual Antirracista, she advocates women's rights and also the fight against racism. So with a very inspiring and also highly politically important work, she was honored already in numerous awards, as for example, in 2019, the Prince Claus Prize granted by the Kingdom of the Netherlands. The BBC recently also considered her among the 100 most influential women in the world. And in 2020, she won the Jabuti Prize. It's the most important award in Brazilian, of the Brazilian literary world. So, Djamila Ribeiro, we are very grateful that you accepted our invitation tonight and for to deliver the third Bell Southern Theory lecture. And it's with much joy that I hand over to you now. I think we're all very curious and very exciting to listen to you. So very warm welcome. Djamila Ribeiro, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Kristina Mashimi. I thank you also Professor Kresse and Professor Juliana Streva. I hope my pronunciation is okay about your names. And I thank also the Berlin University for this opportunity. I will present some Afro-Brazilian intellectuals. I think it's important to bring critical reflections of Afro-Brazilian thinkers, because usually these productions are not being translated the way we wanted to. And also because the politics of translations are also colonial politics. And I think it's important to present another perspective from Brazil, because usually the image that people have from Brazil, people look up to Brazil in the perspective of stereotypes or the perspective of absence. And I think that's important to look up to Brazil in the perspective of potentials and fight and historical movements that were very important to raise awareness on Blackness and social justice issues in general. So I'm going to share my screen. Everybody can see. So I will start with Lélia Gonzalez, who was a very important Afro-Brazilian feminist and also a professor. But as she was reflecting on in Brazilian Portuguese, because even in Brazil, you are kind of isolated because we are in South America, but we are the only country that speak Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. Lélia Gonzalez was a pioneer in the discussions about intersectionality, about Black feminism. But again, as she was thinking in Portuguese, most of her intellectual work is not known abroad. That's why I start with Lélia Gonzalez. And she was also a pioneer in criticizing what she used to call the dependence of the global north, the epistemological dependence of the global north. So, and I quote Lélia Gonzalez, "The risk we run here is all that is implied in the act of speaking. We have been spoken about, infantilized. An infant is someone who cannot speak. A child is someone who can only speak through someone else because adults speak on their behalf. Precisely because of this infantilization, we are taking back our own speech in this work. That is, What has been assumed to be garbage is talking back, and it's about time. End of the quote. Lélia Gonzalez in Racism and Sexism in Brazilian Society. I really like this quote because Lélia Gonzalez, she's talking in a perspective that to try to motivate us to understand our history, not only in the perspective of oppression, but also in the perspective of struggle and the perspective of resistance. Because even in Brazil, when people speak about the reality of the Black people, they will talking about only the perspective of oppression, and they erase movements like Quilombolas movement, or the fight against slavery, the fight against the dictatorship in Brazil. So usually it's only this perspective, the history told about the perspective of the winners, to quote Walter Benjamin. So Lélia Gonzalez is motivating us to see our history from a different perspective, as a perspective of people who historically is contributing to this society, to the Brazilian society, that our history is not, didn't start with colonization. So that's why I think this quote is so powerful, and was so powerful in the time she published this work, and that's why she was so attacked as an intellectual in this country. Não tá indo aqui o... Okay. So we begin with the words of Lélia Gonzalez, one of the greatest thinkers of Brazilian Black feminists, professor in the Department of Sociology at the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro. Gonzalez, as we shall see, is the author of founding texts on concepts and perspectives of international feminism thought, and opened the way for many of us in Brazil to continue in the fight for our existence, knowledge, and new possibilities. She was also very critique to this myth of the universal woman, Lélia Gonzalez, Luisa Barros, Sueli Carneiro, among others, Brazilian intellectuals. The contributions of Black feminists as a whole started to question the universal subject assumed to be white European male, as well as to put in check the universalization of a woman as a category. If, on the one hand, Simone de Beauvoir in her work The Second Sex, when thinking about the condition of woman, defined her as being the other in relation to man, that is, one that's not thought of in itself, but in function of man, Grada Quilomba, interdisciplinary thinker based in Germany, sophisticates the analysis to think of Black women as the other of the other, since he is the double antithesis of whiteness and masculinity. And I quote Grada Quilomba in Plantation Memories. Because they are neither white nor male, Black women occupy a very difficult position in white supremacist society. We represent a kind of double deficiency, a double alterity, since we are the antithesis of both, whiteness and masculinity. In this scheme, the Black woman can only be the other and never herself. White women have an oscillating status, both as themselves and as the other of the white man, since they are white but not men. Black men play the role of opponents of white men, as they are possible competitors in the conquest of white women, since they are men but not white. Black women, however, are neither white nor men, and they function as the other of the other. Sorry, I got a flu. So I present a little bit about Grada Quilomba because you were based in Germany, and I think it's important to present another intellectual that's also based in Germany. She's from Portugal, but she's based in Germany. And then I present Sueli Carneiro, who is a very important, sorry, a very important Afro-Brazilian feminist. Is she alive? And her productions are very important to us, questioning the universalization of woman, but also in the discussions that Sueli Carneiro contribute about epistemicide, that is the erase of epistemologies that comes from Black and Indigenous people. Questioning the universalization of woman as a category, in the article Enegrecer o Feminismo, Blackening Feminism, the Brazilian philosopher Sueli Carneiro, a memorable Brazilian Black feminist, posed the key question: which women are we talking about? And Sueli Carneiro wrote this article in 1995. So after Lélia Gonzalez, she was very inspired by Lélia Gonzalez. But just to present how these women were already in Brazil, contributed to this discussion on Black feminism. Lélia Gonzalez wrote most of her work in the 80s and beginning of the 90s, even before Kimberly Crenshaw published about intersectionality, what is important. We love Kimberly Crenshaw and you read Kimberly Crenshaw. But just to pose this context that Lélia Gonzalez and Sueli Carneiro were reflecting on that, but they are not known in the international debate. And I quote Sueli Carneiro: when we speak of the myth of female fragility, which historically justified the paternalistic protection of men over women, which women are we talking about? We Black women are part of a contingent of women, probably in the majority, who have never recognized this myth in themselves, because we have never been treated as fragile. We are part of a contingent of women who worked for centuries as slaves in the fields or on the streets as salespeople, grocers, prostitutes. Women who didn't understand anything when feminists said that women should be in the streets and work. We are part of a contingent of women with objective identities. Yesterday, at the service of fragile ladies and pervert sugarcane mill masters. This new feminist and anti-racist look, by integrating itself both the struggle traditions of the Black movement and the tradition of struggle of the women's movement, affirms this new political identity arising from the specific condition of being a Black woman. So, end of the quote. So, Sueli Carneiro, in this article, she's reflecting on the situation of Black women in Latin America. The name is Blackening Feminism, the Perspective of Black Women in Latin America. In a way to confront this myth of universalization of woman that was very strong in Brazil, even in a country like Brazil, that most of the population is Black, about 52% of the population. In position of silence. So against the colonial system designed to stifle our voices, Black women continue to challenge the constant updates of the mask of Anastasia, the enslaved, conceived by Brazilian sugarcane mill masters for the enslaved women of uncomfortable words, for which, in order to be silent, the mask was designed so that she could only breathe and do not emit the sound of her voice. On top of the silence, Brazil, the country of soccer and samba, exported the image in which white and Black people coexisted harmoniously, drinking beer around the table and playing the cavaquinho, while the mulatto woman, I'm using this expression, although I do not agree with them, it's on purpose that I put that, while the mulatto woman danced in samba happily. This romanticization of race relations in Brazil discussed in the work Casagrande Senzala, The Masters and the Slaves, by the Brazilian sociologist Gilberto Freire, was called Myth of Racial Democracy. So for Lélia Gonzalez, on the top of silence in Brazil was this myth of racial democracy, this romantic idea of non-racial conflicts in Brazil. This idea that everybody is mixed, everybody lives happily together, and racism is not a problem in Brazil. The problem is just the economic problem. So this image was exported abroad, and usually people think Brazil as this racial paradise. And this myth was very damaged to raise awareness on racism in Brazil. So Brazil was the last country in America to abolish slavery. After the slavery time, that we call the industrialization process in Brazil, there was not any kind of reparation policy for Black people. So there were about 308 years of slavery time, for slavery in Brazil. It means that for almost 4 centuries, the slavery was the basis of economy in Brazil. But after the slavery time, they encouraged European people to come to Brazil to fill the jobs and to work in the industry and also to whitening the population because they believed that Black people represented didn't represent this country. And in the same time, they created this idea of racial democracy. So a very racist country that denies racism for a long time. So that's why I want to present you another important intellectual, Kabengele Munanga. He's professor at University of São Paulo, which is the most important university in Brazil, one of the most important in Latin America. He's from Congo, but he was professor here in Brazil, and he was reflecting about Brazilian reality. So, em As Ambiguidades do Racismo Brasileira, The Ambiguities of Brazilian Racism, the great intellectual Kabengele Munanga summarizes the power of the myth. Like all myths, it works as a belief, a true reality, an order. Hence, the difficulty is getting any Brazilian to confess to racism. And I quote, the myth proclaimed in Brazil a racial paradise, where relations between white and Black people, white people and indigenous people, etc., are harmonious, that is, without prejudice and without discrimination, except for socioeconomic order, which affects all Brazilians and is not based on skin color. In order to consolidate and become increasingly stronger, the myth manipulates some facts evidenced in the reality of a Brazilian society, such as miscegenation, mythical personalities, and symbols of Black cultural resistance in the country. It will say that we are a mestizo people, that is, neither white, neither Black, nor indigenous, a new Brazilian race, a mestizo race. Who will discriminate against whom if you are all mestizos? End of the quote. So this was the idea that was established in Brazil. There is no racism because you are all mestizos. There is no racism because Portuguese people, you were colonized by Portuguese, because Portuguese people is different from British and Spanish. Portuguese people, they like Brazilians, they like the Black people. So in Brazil, this idea of romanticization is not new. There is another myth in Brazil that the slavery was not so violent because Portuguese people was not violent. They create this idea that in Brazil, the life of enslaved person was not so bad. But in the time of in the slavery time, Black people usually lived only 25 years. So all these romantic ideas in Brazil are very strong in a way to deny the violence against Black and indigenous people. And the racial democracy myth is in the top of this attempt to not get responsibility about they did in this country. Munanga's brilliant synthesis reveals the sophistication of this myth so damaging to race relations in Brazil. Lélia Gonzalez, from a Black feminist perspective on this myth, states in Racismo e Sexismo na Cultura Brasileira, Racism and Sexism in Brazilian Culture, and I quote, like every myth, that of racial democracy hides something beyond what it shows. In a first approximation, we find that it exercises its symbolic violence in a special way on Black women. For the other side of carnival deification takes place in this woman's daily life, at the moment when she becomes a maid. That is where the guilt engendered by his deification is exercised with strong charges of aggression. It's also there that is verified that the terms mulatto woman and maid are attributions of the same subject. So Gonzalez is saying that in Carnival, which is a very popular party in Brazil, very popular, usually people in Brazil will celebrate the Black woman in Carnival, say that it's part of our culture and how Carnival is beautiful and so on. But when Carnival finished the other day, this same woman that was being celebrated, she will come back to work in non-social recognized works. So the things will go on as it was meant to be in this oppression look. So that's why Lélia Gonzalez used to call the Brazilian society as neurotic. She used to use these terms, the neuroses of the Brazilian society, because usually Brazilian people will consider Black culture as the culture as the most important culture in Brazil. They'll talk about samba, about carnival, about other different popular manifestations in Brazil. But at the same time that these people are celebrating samba, these people are against affirmative actions, these people are denying races, these people are denying rights for domestic workers. So that's why Lélia Gonzalez used to call the Brazilian society as neurotic. Myth of the Black Mother. In the exported image of Brazilian racial democracy, white and Black men laugh at the sound of samba while the naked mulatto woman dances. If one hand, the mulatto woman is confined to the place of hypersexualization, on the other, there is no room for the Black woman who is a maid, even the image is sold abroad. However, despite having their lives silenced, these women are many. And when I'm criticizing this idea of mulatto woman, of course I am using this term, and I don't agree with that, but it's just to pay attention to this reality. I'm not against carnival. I'm not against these cultural manifestations. I am against the colonial view on that, just to be clear here. So according to researcher Juliana Teixeira from the Federal University of Espírito Santo, in her book Trabalho Doméstico, Domestic Work, there are currently more than 4.35 million predominantly Black women working as maids in the country. A small number due to the pandemic that left 1.8 million unemployed women who are the breadwinners. For these women, uninvited to the Democratic Party, another place for the construction of racism is reserved, the place of the Black mother. And I quote Juliana Teixeira. Black mothers were the expression of the docility expected from enslaved Black people. Because she didn't represent the racist stereotype of the immoral slaves, the slave with the curvaceous body was not idealized for sexual servitude and therefore was not constituted as a threat to the noble ladies. Nor did she represent the stereotype of demonic slaves who were quilombolas, Afro-Brazilian residents of quilombo settlements, and fugitives. They are strongly in the childhood memories and nostalgias of Brazilian writers in the 30s and 60s, such as Carlos Drummond de Andrade, José Lins dos Reis, and José Américo de Almeida. End of the quote. So until today in Brazil, people will use this kind of expression. Oh, I miss my Black mother. Oh, my Black mother, she was so amazing. She raised me. This woman was a maid, and it's a way also a romantic view about that, the role of the Black mother in Brazil. Mother of the Brazilian culture. Regarding the Black mother, Gonzalez, Lélia Gonzalez, says that she, in fact, was the mother of Brazilian culture, as she was the one who breastfed, bathed, cared for, put to sleep, and told stories while white women served, oddly enough, just for giving birth to the children of the masters. Because they were the mothers, they taught the language of culture, Portuguese, something like Black English. A language is still spoken today that's decisive influence of Black and indigenous culture in the colonial language, constituting a language of its own spoken throughout the country. So, Lélia Gonzalez, she presents, yes, that is this myth of the Black mother, a place that this racist and sexist capitalist society confined Black women. But as our history is not only about oppression, but also about struggle and resistance, this same woman, actually, for Lélia Gonzalez, is the mother of the Brazilian culture because these women keep a lot of knowledge with her. This woman, she actually teaches the white kids how to speak Portuguese, which is this language, the valorization of the spoken language. So for Lélia Gonzalez, it's important not to see this woman only as an object of oppression, but also as a subject of knowledge and a subject of her own perspective. And I quote Lélia Gonzalez. It's funny how the elitist white society make fun of us when you say Flamengo. Flamengo is a very popular soccer team in Brazil, and we write with L, not R. But Lélia Gonzalez is referring when people speak Flamengo, studying of Flamengo, and how people make fun, saying that they speak in a wrong way, just to explain the context. It's funny how the elitist white society make fun of us when we say Flamengo. They call us ignorant, saying that you can speak correctly, and suddenly they are unaware that the presence of this R in place of L is nothing more than the linguistic mark of an African language in which L does not exist. After all, who is ignorant? At the same time, they find so-called Brazilian speech so cool, a kind of speech which drops the final R's of verbal infinitives, which abbreviates você to say, está into tá, and so on. They are not even aware they are speaking Portuguese. So to Lélia Gonzalez, the Portuguese is the valorization of spoken language, the language that come from Black, African, and indigenous cultures in Brazil. And for her, it's very important to value this language, and sometimes the people that make fun of it even do not realize that they are also speaking Portuguese. So yes, we are colonized by Portuguese people. That's why we speak Portuguese, because the language and the culture was imposed to us. But in the same time, we also affect this language because the Portuguese that we speak in Brazil is not the same Portuguese from Portugal. There are some linguistic thinkers that defends that in Brazil, actually we speak brasileiro. It's a Brazilian Portuguese. So yes, we are colonized, that's why we speak Portuguese, but in the same time, we also affect this language. We are also a subject of resistance. So with Lélia Gonzalez, I started. With Lélia Gonzalez, I finished my lecture with her words, emphasizing how much this Brazilian thinker anticipated many debates in Black feminists, while not being a mandatory bibliography in studies on the subject due to Brazil's geopolitical position in the south of the world, in the global south, and how Lélia Gonzalez also, in the 80s, was thinking about a transnational struggle in Latin America and Caribbean when she created the concept Americanidade, Americanity, something like that. Because for Lélia Gonzalez, it was important that Black and Indigenous people in this geography should understand, although there are differences of context, there are many similarities between our situations. And to Lélia Gonzalez, it was very important to us to look up to Latin America, to look up to the global south, to understand ourselves, and try to create a transnational struggle to face the consequences of colonialism, sexism, and racism. She's not against the global north. It's not about that, but it's to pay attention how in Brazil, in South America, but in Brazil, specifically in Brazil, we do not look up to our realities as potential realities. The academia in Brazil is very Eurocentric. It's a white male-dominated space, and how even for Lélia Gonzalez, it was difficult to publish her works and to criticize this system. So Lélia was very important to make us proud of our legacy as a people who is historically fighting against the system, but also is not only reacting to the system, but also creating, thinking new possibilities of existence. So that's what I had to present today, and now I am open for the questions, and I hope you have questions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Djamila Ribeiro, for a very inspiring talk. And yeah, I already have lots of things I would like to ask you, but before we open the floor to the wider audience, I'm very happy to quickly introduce Juliana Streva to you. Juliana, thank you very much that you accepted our invitation today to deliver a short response. Today, I think it's fantastic because your work actually has so many connection points. So Juliana Streva is a Brazilian transdisciplinary researcher and experimental artist. She's based in Berlin, and her academic artistic work engages with the poetic politics of anti-racist, feminist, and decolonial movements, corporalities, and counter-archives. I quickly want to mention just two of Juliana's works. In 2018, she published her monography. It's called Body, Race, Power, Black Extermination in Brazil, a critical decolonial and Foucauldian reading. And I also would like to mention her really impressive documentary film, that is called Women in Movement from 2020, which he also calls the materialization of a living archive. Currently, Juliana is a postdoctoral fellow at the Institute for Latin American Studies at Freie Universität Berlin, with a program Beyond Social Cohesion, Global Repertoires of Living Together, and that's a project in the framework of the Berlin University Alliance. So Juliana, thank you very much once again, and the floor is yours for a quick response of around 10 minutes, and then we will open for the wider discussion then with all participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your introduction and for the invitation and for organizing this event, especially in the name of Kai. Boa tarde, Djamila, and good afternoon all. I would like maybe to start engaging with the proposal of Portuguese and América Latina that Djamila just mentioned to us, and I will bring three entangled points for the discussion, maybe as a possibility of discussion. And I would start with the kind of relation between local and global, because I think this is quite crucial for the project of América Latina and for creating translocal dialogues. Specifically regarding the myth of racial democracy that Djamila Ribeiro so well explained, I think there is two important points, especially speaking from Berlin. Like the first mention of this Brazilian myth of harmony and unrivaled mix of people and colors was actually presented by a Bavarian named Karl von Martius in 1838, when he answered the context proposed by the Brazilian Institute of History and Geography. And the name of this contest was How to Write the Brazilian History. And a Bavarian, because in that time Germany was not still officially a nation state, proposed this myth of this unrivaled mix of people and colors, and he won the prize. And since then, Brazil has been adopted this not only as a national discourse of his history, but also a national identity, what Djamila mentioned as this mestiçagem, a way of dividing and depoliticizing movements of resistance in Brazil. And a second point that I would like to bring, also since we're speaking from Berlin, is the point that after the Second World War, UNESCO actually was the institution that sponsored 3 meetings in Brazil to try to demonstrate how Brazil was a specific case because there was no racism there. So they tried to find a country that they could not see kind of this racist tension, and they chose Brazil to try to demonstrate how we managed to live together. And of course, after sponsoring those meetings and creating the first department of racial studies, it was demonstrated that actually this was a myth. And so it's very connected, this kind of local history that we're bringing from Brazil, talking about the myth of racial democracy, to the context of Germany, and therefore also with global histories. So my first point, without being so extensive, would be how these colonial legacies of violence are part of a grander narrative, and yet part of a very localized and specific experience located in Brazil. So instead of reinscribing this Eurocentric dichotomy binary between global and local, how to see this as relational, and how the Brazilian myth of racial democracy speaks not only about the racist democracy in Brazil, but also could offer a conceptualization to problematize the racist structure of power beyond Brazil. So I think it's important to bring here also the point of how Southern theories, since this also is the third Berlin Southern theories, should not only be invoked to understand Southern realities, but also to not reinscribe epistemicide, as Sueli Carneiro mentions, this erasure of counter-narratives within the hegemonic debates of politics, represented democracy, and other forms of living together. So this is a first point to understand this not only as a tension between local and global, but also as a relational. The second point is going the same direction, but now thinking about the personal and the political. And I would like to mention the role of storytelling with Djamila's last publication, Cartas para Minha Avó, that could be translated Letters to My Grandmother, that was published this year, and how she brings her personal experience, feelings, and memories to sharing, of course, a personal experience, but also it's for me very strong how we can see structural relations of power, of racism, of sexism, or disentanglement of race, sexism, and class in her personal story. And I think it's quite fascinating how this is being also a tool to dispute histories and see histories, counter narratives with beyond academic language. And then we go the Portuguese of Lélia Gonzalez, that we speak Portuguese, but also her way of writing her papers that is not reproducing an academic language that people cannot connect, the people that are not academics, and how the potential of this storytelling also to dispute and to disrupt the hierarchies of knowledge, which is quite Eurocentric, white-dominated, and male-centered. So this is the second point about Djamila's work, and I think also goes in relation with Conceição Evaristo, Maria Carolina de Jesus, Beatriz Nascimento, that works also with films, literature, and these other ways of perceiving knowledge. And the third and final point that I would like to bring, and also Djamila presented what she named as this colonial politics of translation. And I would like to listen more about this political economy of citation, which is also reinscribed Eurocentric thinkers and the same canon of knowledge. So how to create translocal dialogues and articulations, since we can see that most of non-work of Lélia Gonzalez has been translated to English. Sueli Carneiro has no work also translated to English. I think she has in French and Spanish, but in English, I am not aware. Now Beatriz Nascimento just had this year 2 papers translated to English. So how this also, how translation and the politics of translation, it's also a way to transform this epistemicide and enables to bring action and dialogues and a translocal articulation among Black feminists from America Latina, but also feminisms in anti-racist struggles translocally. So, and then I would also quote Grada Quilombo, one can only speak when one's voice is listened to. So I think this is very important to bring this dialogue about translation, local and global, and storytelling. Thank you so much for your lecture, Djamila, and I'm also looking forward to hear the discussions.
Thank you, Juliana, for this very engaging and elaborate response. Djamila, I would hand over to you first to maybe quickly react on these 3 points that Juliana has raised, and then we can open up for the broader discussion, if that is okay.
Yes, I agree with Juliana when she says that it's not a tension between local and global, because we needed to deconstruct this idea of universality first. You know, this the white man is the political, epistemological, and ethical paradigm. So that's why we are also creating tensions, because we are still electing this category as universal. So Grada Quilombo, she says, who is different from whom? So usually a white person look at me and say, you are different, or people in the global north can look to people in the global south and say, you are different, but actually we are mutual difference. So sometimes we are creating these tensions because we are still legitimizing the same category. That's why usually we are also putting, you know, you are different and this is diverse. What is diversity actually? Diversity in Brazil, for example, people think that diversity is to put different people together, but diversity it's about the recognition of the plurality of the society. So maybe we needed to change the category, the way you were thinking, to not put everything in tension all the time. And so that's why I really enjoyed what Juliana said, because for us, there is no tension about that. We need actually to create new categories. We need actually to stop dehumanizing other people. That's why you are also put in discussions in tension. So I really enjoy it. And about the storytelling, she's talking about this book, which was my last book. It's the first time that I write a memoir book. And it was very difficult to me to write this book because I was very, I've studied in a very good university in Brazil. I've studied philosophy and I have a master in political philosophy. So it meant that I have to study for 7 years, white man from Europe. So that is a philosophy course in Brazil. So philosophy is about Germany, France, Greek thinkers. So when I decided to study female philosophers, I've heard a lot of bad things. My professor said a lot of, sorry about the word, but said a lot of bullshit when I decided to study female philosophers. So, when I decided to study African philosophers, a professor said to me, this does not exist. There's no such a thing as African philosophy. So in this context, so I had to study what the course decided what philosophy is, but I had to build networks to study female philosophers, to study Simone de Beauvoir, for example. I've studied Simone de Beauvoir, Judith Butler, a lot of feminist philosophers. So I had to create these networks. Even in the university, we create groups there to study. So I was very disciplined in this way. So to be respected in this space, you needed to domain the language, you needed to behave as a philosophy student. So I was very disciplined and I had to follow that. Although I was studying other philosophers, I was fighting in the university to bring the thought of female and Black philosophers. But when I defended my dissertation, and it was a very hostile moment sometimes, it was very difficult to defend the thinkers that I was using as reference. It was very difficult. That's why I think you need also to discuss the psychological damage. It's also important a discussion that we need to bring when we are discussing the colonial thought. But when I defended my dissertation, yes, although I was fighting against this model, I had somehow to fit in, to have access to a scholarship or this kind of things. So to write a book like that for me was very difficult because I need to be respected. I need to respect. I need to respect. So for me, it was very important to understand that, wow, you are here publishing Black people, because I publish, I am an editor. I have already published 14 books written by Black male and female authors, but in the same time, I was still struggling with this system. So this book for me was a way to, to really understand that I didn't need to fit in this model anymore. So that's why I decided, although I was studying thinkers that was writing about their own experience, I really love to read, but for me it was very difficult, especially in Brazil, to do that. So I'm not going to write more academic books, this kind of pressure. So that's why this book for me, it's very important, because I had to, it was also a personal journey for me to understand my place in this world. And as Juliana said, Carolina Maria de Jesus for me is one example of the Portuguese. Carolina Maria de Jesus, she was a Black woman born in a favela here in São Paulo, and she wrote important books. She's translated for more than 10 languages. She's considered one of the most important writers in Brazil, but because she was writing Portuguese, for a long time in Brazil, she was not considered as a canon. She was not considered as a great writer. And even now that her book is being edited again, Conceição Evaristo, who is a very important writer in Brazil, she's organizing these tests. She decided to keep the language the way Carolina Maria de Jesus wrote. And she wrote wrong, if you are having the grammatic normative as a model. So a lot of linguists, a lot of intellectuals in Brazil were criticizing, no, you should correct Carolina Maria de Jesus. So these kind of discussions are still very strong in Brazil. So the language, as Gloria Zandua reflects on Chicano, saying Chicano is not wrong, Chicano is a live language. A lot of intellectuals in Latin America was celebrating and valuing the spoken language. So it's very important to write in a way that people will understand. So I think it's a very important discussions. And about the translations, yes, I think it's we needed to face these politics of translations. I have some of my books were translated to French, Spanish, and Italian, but not in English. It's very difficult to have an English translations of our books. Lugar de Fala is being translated to Germany in a partnership with Universität of Mainz. But all of this work, this translation work, we did that because we had a very important network of decolonial thinkers. In France, my editor is an independent published house. In Italy, the same. In Latin America and Spain, the same. So it's very difficult to have that. That's why when I go to the United States, I have the opportunity to go several times to the United States to hold talks, and I talk with the Black feminists in the United States. Yes, you need to translate us because you are translating your work here. Angela Davis was translated in Brazil, the first official translation in 2016. I was part of the group who was defending the translation of Women, Race, and Class. And it was a success here in Brazil. A book that was originally published in 1908 was only published in Brazil in 2016 due to the fight of Black women here. So why our sister United States are not doing the same? So I also say that you need to translate Lélia Gonzalez, Sueli Carneiros, Luisa Bairros, because you cannot create another kind of hegemony. So people, when they think about Black feminism, they think about United States. And they say Black America, they are quoting United States, but in Brazil, we are also Black America. We are Black population is the majority of the population, and also in America, we are in South America. So I think it's very important to confront these politics and to translate these women, because I am here today struggling to speak in English, but just because I speak English. So there are a lot of important women here in Brazil who don't speak English, because in Brazil, you do not learn Spanish and English as a second language in schools. You need to pay courses. So most of the Black people, they didn't have money to pay courses. So also it's important to invite these people who do not speak English to be here, but have the possibility to translate what they have to say, because it's very difficult to us to learn another language, very difficult. So that's why I think you needed to rethink a lot about that.
Thank you very much, Djamila, for this beautiful last words, and I think we learned a lot today on these anti-racist, decolonial, and feminist struggles, and also to the question of to which audiences we could carry them. Thank you very much for this engaging discussion. Also, I would like to hand over now to Kai Kresse for some concluding words.
Thank you very much. No bullet points and concluding remarks other than to say a big thank you. I think we've had a very lively exchange and discussion here. We've learned a lot. We've obtained much food for thought, for thinking matters and important matters further from different perspectives. So thank you once again, Djamila Ribeiro. Thank you also, Juliana Streva. And thank you all of you, for listening and participating in this event. Thanks a lot, Kristina.
Thank you so much for this opportunity.
And also, finally, thanks to Christoph Marx and Lena Herzog here in the room, without whom this event would have not been possible. Yes, and with this vote of thanks, return safely back either to your desks and living rooms or your homes and offices. Goodbye. Djamila, thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
So much.
We're pleased. Thanks.